Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine telling someone that a truly global catastrophe, the complete fall of centuries-old empires, and, well, the total reshaping of the modern world, all started simply because a driver took a wrong turn on one single street in Sarajevo. I mean, it sounds completely absurd, right? But as we'll see in this explainer, that is exactly what happened. One small, seemingly innocent mistake triggered a massive chain reaction that dragged the entire globe into a total nightmare. To really grasp the gravity of that one wrong turn, we just need to look at this number, 20 million. World War I killed over 20 million people. Setting this incomprehensible scale of human tragedy against one tiny driving error really sharply contrasts the sheer madness of this conflict. The stakes literally could not possibly be higher. So let's unpack exactly how the world tumbled right over the edge. The geopolitical trap had actually been set long before anyone even fired a shot. In 1914 Europe, you basically had a continent-wide standoff. You had the Triple Alliance on one side and the Triple Entente on the other. Picture them constantly going back and forth like, hey, France, don't even think about attacking us, because we've got Austria, Hungary, and Italy backing us up. And France going, oh yeah? Well, we've got Russia and Britain. It was supposed to be a deterrent, but instead these alliances became incredibly dangerous tripwires. They absolutely guaranteed that any small, localized fight would instantly drag everyone into a massive war. Now, on top of those alliances, tensions were escalating rapidly thanks to a wildly expensive naval arms race. Back in 1906, Britain launched this massive warship called the Dreadnought, and it literally made every other battleship in the world obsolete overnight, a real game changer. So Germany immediately started building their own just to keep up. Between 1906 and 1914, Britain built 29, Germany built 17, and neither side was going to back down. The powder keg was packed and ready to blow. The spark in Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. It all began with a highly chaotic motorcade and a failed grenade attack. Archduke Franz Ferdinand actually survived that initial attack, but then he made the fateful decision to visit the injured at the hospital. And this is where history literally pivots on a dime. On the way to the hospital, his driver took a wrong turn, tried to reverse, and completely stalled the car. And where did it stall? It stopped right in front of a 19-year-old assassin named Gavrilo Princip. Princip simply pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots. Both the Archduke and his wife were dead within the hour. And in an instant, those diplomatic tripwires we just talked about began snapping. Watch how fast this builds into a totally unstoppable chain reaction. Austria demands the impossible from Serbia, then declares war. Russia mobilizes to defend Serbia. So Germany declares war on Russia. Then Germany declares war on France because France is allied with Russia. And to get to France faster, Germany invades Belgium. But Britain had a treaty to protect Belgium, so Britain declares war on Germany. Germany literally mocked Britain for going to war over what they called a mere scrap of paper. In just a matter of days, almost every single major country in Europe was at war. At the start, everyone thought it would be over by Christmas. Germany had this highly ambitious strategy called the Schlieffen Plan. Step 1, swing a massive army up through Belgium. Step 2, crush Paris in just 6 weeks. Step 3, turn the whole army around and deal with Russia. Quick and easy, right? Well, except Belgium fought back. The fortress city of Liège held the Germans up for almost 2 weeks, totally throwing the entire plan off schedule. That is, until Germany brought in their massive 420mm Big Bertha siege guns to just blast right through. By September, the Germans were within 30 miles of Paris, but they had marched so incredibly fast that a dangerous gap opened up right between 2 of their armies. French General Joffre spotted it and immediately launched a massive counterattack. And in one of the most incredible, almost movie-like moments of the war, 600 Paris taxicabs were actually used to rush soldiers directly to the front lines. This famous taxicab rush helped win the Battle of the Marne, and the Schlieffen Plan was officially dead. The nightmare of the trenches. When both armies simply ran out of room to maneuver, they dug in. This radically slowed the war down into a grim, continuous 475-mile trench line stretching all the way from the North Sea down to the Swiss border. These trenches were an absolute weakening nightmare of freezing mud, enormous rats, and rotting disease. But amidst all that horror, something truly unbelievable happened. On Christmas Eve of 1914, German soldiers started singing Silent Night, and British soldiers sang back. Roughly 100,000 men actually climbed out of their muddy trenches, met right in the middle of no man's land, exchanged cigarettes, and even buried their dead together. It's a staggering contrast of basic humanity against the horrors of war. But the commanders? Oh, they were furious. On future Christmases, they explicitly ordered artillery fire just to make absolutely sure an organic truce like that never happened again. Warfare was rapidly changing, and it was becoming infinitely more cruel. In April 1915, Germany introduced a horrifying new weapon at the Second Battle of Ypres: poison gas. They released 168 tons of chlorine gas along a 4-mile stretch of the front. Soldiers without any protection literally choked, went blind, and terribly drowned in their own lungs. Both sides quickly adopted chemical warfare after that, adding this terrifying, invisible threat to the battlefield. While the West was locked in a brutal stalemate, we really have to recognize the massive scale elsewhere. On the Eastern Front, the Germans absolutely devastated the Russians at Tannenberg, taking 92,000 prisoners in just days. And the war had stretched way down to the Middle East, too. A young politician you might have heard of named Winston Churchill pushed for an amphibious assault at Gallipoli to open up a supply route to Russia. It was a complete disaster. Ottoman forces pinned the Allies on the beaches for 8 grueling months, costing roughly 250,000 casualties on each side. By 1916, the sheer carnage was almost incomprehensible. Look at this figure from the Somme offensive: 57,000. That is the number of British casualties on just the very first day. The British dropped 1.5 million artillery shells on German lines for a whole week, assuming it completely destroyed the defenses. They hadn't. When the British soldiers walked over the top, they marched straight into waiting German machine guns. It remains the bloodiest single day in British military history. But one slightly lighter, honestly fascinating detail emerged from the absolute tragedy of the Somme. The British introduced a brand new, highly secret weapon: big, armored vehicles that could cross trenches and crush barbed wire. To keep them hidden from enemy spies during production, they disguised them as mobile water receptacles. If anyone asked, "Hey, what are you building?" they'd just say, "Oh, they're just water tanks." They called them tanks to deflect attention, and amazingly, that wonderfully mundane name just stuck forever. 1917, the turning point. Back in Russia, citizens were starving, revolution toppled the Tsar, and Lenin eventually pulled Russia entirely out of the war. This suddenly freed up 1 million German soldiers to head straight toward the Western Front. So, with the Allies totally reeling from Russia's exit, a massive question loomed: what finally brought the United States into the war? Up until now, America had largely stayed out of the fight. Well, the answer lies in an incredibly foolish strategic gamble by Germany that backfired in pretty much the most spectacular way imaginable. Now, what's really interesting about this message is the sheer audacity of it. This is the Zimmermann telegram. Germany secretly reached out to Mexico and basically said, "Hey, Mexico, if the United States joins the war against us, how about you invade America? And, if you win, you can have Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back." I mean, can you even imagine? British codebreakers actually intercepted this absurd telegram. American newspapers printed it for everyone to see, and the U.S. was furious. On April 6, 1917, the United States officially declared war on Germany. Germany knew they were suddenly on a very tight clock. American troops were coming, but they'd take months to arrive in full force. Meanwhile, the French army was literally at its breaking point. After a disastrous offensive killed 130,000 men in just a few days, an outright mutiny spread like wildfire. Soldiers in about half of all French divisions simply refused to attack. They'd defend the trenches, sure, but they wouldn't charge into machine guns anymore. Germany realized they had one final window in early 1918 to win the whole war before the Americans showed up. So Germany threw everything they had into a massive spring offensive, punching 40 miles deep into Allied territory. But they bled their absolute best troops dry doing it. By July, their momentum was dead. Then the Allies counterattacked, and the collapse was shockingly rapid. August 8th was dubbed the Black Day for the German army at Amiens. From there, the dominoes fell so fast. Bulgaria surrenders in September, the Ottomans in October, Austria-Hungary in November. After a German naval mutiny, the Kaiser fled the country, and on November 11th, at the 11th hour, the guns finally went silent. A bitter, fragile peace, June 28th, 1919. Notice that incredible thematic bookend there? The powers gathered to settle the bill exactly 5 years to the day after the assassination in Sarajevo. The Allies basically sat Germany down at Versailles and said, "All right, this whole war was your fault." And Germany's like, "Wait, we didn't even start it?" And the Allies replied, "Doesn't matter, you're paying for it." The demands were intentionally crushing: 132 billion gold marks in reparations, 13% of their territory completely stripped away. Their army was strictly capped at just 100,000 men, and absolutely no air force, tanks, or submarines allowed. The choice was simple: sign the treaty or we invade. The geopolitical map of the world was radically, irrevocably redrawn. Four massive empires that had existed for centuries, the German, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, and the Ottoman empires, they simply vanished from the earth. New countries were carved right out of the rubble, places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and several Baltic states. Meanwhile, the Middle East was carved up by Britain and France in highly controversial ways that honestly are still causing serious geopolitical conflicts to this very day. But the most dangerous legacy of this entire era lies directly in the punishing terms of Versailles. That bitter peace created a deep, simmering resentment across a completely ruined nation. A disillusioned corporal who had served on the Western Front named Adolf Hitler, well, he would spend the next 20 years expertly exploiting Germany's collective anger over this very treaty, using it as fuel to ignite an even more devastating global inferno. Which brings us to our conclusion, perfectly captured by French Marshal Foch. Looking at the Treaty of Versailles, he accurately and chillingly predicted, this is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years, and he was off by exactly 65 days. So what should you take away from all this? How did the architects of this peace fail to see the absolute catastrophe they were setting up for the next generation? I'll leave you with that provocative thought. The tripwires were reset, and the world was unknowingly marching right toward World War II.